Um, all right, perfect. So we got some people joining us here, which is amazing. Let's just give people a minute or two figuring out their Zooms and lives, basically, depending on where you are in, the world. You might be midday, evening, etc. So let's just have people figure out how to press these wonderful buttons on our computers and tabs and phones and whatever before we get started. But as you expect, you are here for a legal webinar with somebody from Worzimer Masserman firm who will introduce herself, which is lovely Crystal here, who will introduce herself. So we'll just, until we wait until somebody kind of, more people join in, on your screen, there is a frequently asked questions, or like a questions box. You can press that box to ask questions. So feel free throughout this webinar to ask questions if there are any, so we can address them at the end. So just take your chance. It's anonymous, so we can see the names, but nobody else can see them. So don't be shy to ask questions if there are any. And if you're watching the recording after this webinar, also feel free to reach out to me or Crystal, of course. We have all the contact info at the end. So if you're on YouTube watching this or whatever, like we'll get there as well, so you can communicate with us. But if you happen to be here live, then just feel free to chime in with all the questions you might have. And we'll just give people another minute and then we will get started. Or actually, we can actually get started now, and we can just start with some introductions and like softer things until people figure all of that out. All right, perfect. So welcome, and we have today's schedule. Today we're going to do a short introduction, both about myself and Crystal. I see my name is weirdly not on that on that little text there. We'll talk a little bit about Hatch and Pacific Fertility Center very briefly, and also about Worzimer Masserman firm, just so you all know who you're speaking to here today. I'm going to keep a little bit track on my phone. If you see me glancing downwards, I'm bad with time management, so that's one of my betterments this year to work on. And we're going to then talk about U.S. surrogacy law by state. So we're not going to go state by state, but we will do an overview. Crystal is going to walk us through a little bit of, what are the legal states for surrogacy regulation? What are the favorable, the friendly ones? Like, is there any states we should stay away from, and why is that? So just a little bit of an overview, but also talk a little bit about any changes that are coming up. I know we had Michigan recently, which I want you to address, Crystal, later, but also maybe some other states with upcoming changes, for example. I think we have Colorado for egg donation as well, right? Something's going on there a little bit, so we can talk about that. Then we'll briefly talk about California as an option for surrogacy. And the reason why it says is that the only option is because it's kind of a misconception sometimes that California is the only option for a surrogacy journey, especially. And we'll talk about why that is and what the options are, and what kind of impacts that could have when we minimize or like the pool to just California. And we'll talk a little bit about birthright citizenship and for international intended parents about leaving the United States in terms of passports, etc. And also a lot of international intended parents might have questions on birthright citizenship, given recent attempts to change that. And Crystal can walk us through if there is any change actually that's happened and how that's impacted the field. Then we'll do some frequently asked questions if we have time for that. And then, of course, a Q&A with the ones that are here. So that's the schedule for today. Today's host, so Crystal is not really good at making herself look different. We did have Andrew Worzimer that was supposed to be here, who is an attorney at law and partner of Worzimer Masserman firm, but he was called into jury duty. So we just switched it up quickly, but Crystal is amazing and great. So no issues there, just another face here. I'll let Crystal, introduce yourself briefly, if you don't mind, a couple of sentences of who you are, where you are, and what you do.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I am Crystal Zambrano. I am an attorney at Worzimer Masserman. I am one of the partners. I work closely with Andy, and I know he's, sad he couldn't join us today, but I've actually been working with Worzimer Masserman and with Andy for about 10 years total
Wow,
now. And
amazing.
so I've worked, on hundreds of cases representing intended parents such as yourself. So lots of experience. I live in Los Angeles. Our firm is based out of California, but we are licensed in other states. And we've worked with intended parents working with surrogates all over the US, and also with intended parents all over the world. I would say probably more than 55 countries and counting. So this is our sole practice. This is what we focus on, what we do every day. We've handled probably about 25,000 assisted reproduction technology cases between egg donation and surrogacy since the firm started about 31 years ago. So, lots of experience here to share.
Yeah, absolutely an amazing track record. And I personally also worked with a VM firm for my journey in the past. So definitely kind of a great firm, great people, which is awesome. Myself, I'm Edwin. I'm the international manager here at Hatch, Egg Donation and Surrogacy, and also at our partner clinic, Pacific Fertility Center, Los Angeles. We call it PFCLA for short because that name is too long to say too many times. I'm also a father to surrogacy and egg donation, so I've been through that process twice actually. So I have two lovely kids through that. If I look tired, there you have the reason for that. And had an amazing journey with Hatch actually the last time around, and always worked with Pacific Fertility Center for my IVF. So that's what I do. All right, so let's talk shortly about Hatch and PFCLA then. We won't get too deep inside of this because many of you already know us, and those who don't, can probably find that online. But we are a combination of an agency that's been running for 34 years now, created in 1991. So it's been a journey and a half. I've been here for the last 5 of those years, so I'm very privileged and happy to be here based on that legacy, which is Hatch. Hatch was the first egg donor agency in the United States, one of the first surrogacy agencies as well. So basically doing everything non-medical, which you can expect from an agency and beyond, I would say, egg donation, surrogacy, working with great legal partners like VM Firm to take care of the legal part of things, insurance coordination. And we're very lucky to also have our own in-house clinic. So Pacific Fertility Center is not a partner only, it's our own clinic, which makes an amazing opportunity for us to really have our hands on the whole process and stay accountable for what happens. It also gives us a great opportunity to work as one team between the agency and clinic, to have doctors in-house to review medical records of donors and surrogates before acceptance of those, uterus lining checks, etc., is a really great thing just to drive that expertise from our doctors. This is a highly medical journey in terms of, in addition to legal, of course, etc. So just like that package deal is something that's really amazing. And we call that the Peace of Mind program, where we basically fix all of those costs within one package. So that's a little bit of what we do. And here's just some background on Hatch. I mean, I think VM Firm always sounds amazing. And the Hatch is lucky to also have a great background and history, number of births and countries, intended parents served from different countries. Seem to be very similar there for some reason. I know we have worked very closely together for many, many years, which is also amazing. So there's just a little bit of background on Hatch and who we are there. And we are lucky to have our own clinic, like I mentioned. So Pacific Fertility Center Los Angeles obviously is based out of LA. Been doing this for 30 years on their end. 4,000 surrogacy births. I think we're up to 13,500 births in total. 2 of those are my kids, whichever number they might be in that mix. And then, of course, we could talk more about success rates, etc., of how we, with our own lab, with our own clinic, our own staff, with our fabulous 5 doctors, how we try to make this as successful as possible as we can. All right, so we talked a little bit about VM. Is there anything else you want to throw in there about VM, Crystal? Do you feel like we covered it well with your introduction there?
Well, I would say that, especially when you're going through surrogacy, or egg donation, there's so many, it seems like a black hole of information. And I think something that we really pride ourselves in is really being there for our clients from beginning to end, from the time that you start this process. And if you need, assistance figuring out or confirming the legality or what the legal process looks like in the state where your surrogate lives, that's something that we're always happy to help with. And really hand holding our clients throughout the process until you go home with your baby. Like I said, we've been doing this for 31 years now. The partners that run Vorsimer, Masterman, Andy, and Dean were part of the group of attorneys who helped write the laws in California that applied to surrogacy. They were the first attorneys to get a pre-birth order in California as well. So, and we also have a litigation practice. So there's that perspective to our practice as well, which I think just kind of gives a different perspective in how we approach our cases and how we protect our clients.
Yeah. And the guidance is absolutely necessary. And I mean, it doesn't matter if you're in the US or outside of the US. having that hand holding, I think it's crucial to make sure not only that things are right, but that you're not stressing throughout the journey, sweating, wondering what's going on. So that's great. All right, well, perfect. Well, let's look into this little field of surrogacy then, how that all works. Looking a little bit on this map here, which gives a little bit of a good overview on which states are really surrogacy friendly, which ones might be available, but there might be different reasons for caution, and which ones should we basically stay out of. So can you walk us through a little bit, Crystal, just about, maybe mentioning a couple of surrogacy friendly states and why a state is surrogacy friendly or not, and
Mhm.
some of the ones that are maybe in the middle ground and if and how we can work there, and then just mention, maybe one or two that we really don't go to before you dive into Michigan a little bit, which we have a little red circle there for a good reason as well.
Yeah, of course. So, as the map points out, surrogacy is legal and enforceable in over 25 states in the US. I mean, there's really 42 jurisdictions all over the US, where different types of intended parents can pursue surrogacy safely in the United States. Um, there's 25 that I would say are, the top states where most people can work. And then there are, different rules that apply in different states that may limit who can work in that state, but that doesn't make them not friendly. It just means that we got to plan ahead, which is part of what, Hatch and our firm do together on behalf of our clients. The planning starts before matching with a surrogate, right? We want to coordinate with you as intended parents and amongst ourselves to make sure that you are matched with a surrogate in a state that allows you to confirm your parental rights, right? And the states that you work in will depend on a variety of facts that are specific to you. So, for example, the genetic link. Are we using our own gametes, your own eggs, your own sperm, or are we using donor sperm or donor eggs? The marital status of the parties. I mean, believe it or not, some states require intended parents to be married in order to pursue surrogacy in those states. So, seems kind of an old school idea, but yeah, we got to look out for that fact as well when we're looking at the states. Um, if there's residency requirements, that's another fact that we look into. And then we also have to consider whether that state will grant us a pre-birth order or a post-birth order.
Mm.
Now, some of the states that are surrogacy friendly are in, darker green here on the map. I'll mention some of them. Colorado is a great state, Connecticut, New Jersey, Nevada, Washington, Vermont, Illinois, Oregon. Those are all states that are favorable for most types of intended parents. So those are ones that, we would definitely recommend. But of course, every case is different. So you always have to, check in with the VM team and with the Hatch team to confirm that it's an appropriate match based on the facts.
Yeah. And what would you say makes kind of one thing that I kind of hear is that the openness to different kinds of intended parents can make it more or less surrogacy friendly. What else is there that makes it more or less surrogacy friendly? Is it, that there's a legal process in place, or that they are, sometimes we have maybe, some counties that are like more friendly? Like, what makes it more friendly, if anything else, except for like being available for different intended parents?
Yeah, so I think other things to consider are, the availability of surrogates in some states, costs, what the legal process looks like in some states. If some states will only grant you a post-birth order,
Mm.
that doesn't mean that you're not the legal parent of your child. Of course, it means that you are the legal parent of your child. But if that process maybe takes too long post-birth, and because you're an international intended parent, let's say, for example, you might need to get home a little bit sooner
Mm.
than when the post-birth order might be available. So maybe that's not the best state for you because you are an international intended parent. So that's something to consider.
Yeah.
In other states, for example, there are some judges that are, a little bit more lenient, or maybe they move things along a little bit quicker versus others. So it'll depend on, whether the surrogate lives in that area and whether there is access to that particular judge. So, I mean, those are other factors to take into account when considering the state in which the surrogate lives.
And how about the pre-birth order and post-birth order? Can you kind of, in a simple way, which is the hard ask, explain for those who wonder what is the difference between post and pre-birth order and post-birth order, and what does it actually impact?
Yeah, so a pre-birth order is a court order signed by a judge that declares the intended parents the legal parents of the baby before the birth.
Mm,
Okay. A post-birth order is the same thing. It's a court order declaring the intended parents the legal parents of the baby, but it occurs post-birth.
mhm.
In some states that are very surrogacy friendly, like for example, Missouri, you can only get a post-birth order. And it's done very quickly after birth. For example, you can get it, I believe last time I checked a month ago, it was like within a week more or less of the birth. So you get it very quickly, but it's done post-birth.
Yeah,
And then what that means is that for that short period of time where you don't yet have that post-birth order, we need to make sure that there's a power of attorney in place so that the intended parents make all medical decisions for the baby in the hospital. So it's about planning for things like that. That's one of the effects that the pre-birth order versus the post-birth order decision might have,
okay.
making medical decisions. But that shouldn't really be a obstacle if you find the right surrogate there, because like I said, there are ways of addressing it in a way that is legal and safe for intended parents.
Perfect.
And then again, the timing of the birth certificate and the timing of obtaining a passport to return home, which I know we'll touch on that subject later.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you say that part about Missouri, because I think a lot of our international intended parents might think that a pre-birth order state is absolutely necessary. But to
Mhm.
me, it sounds like, there's still ways to work in post-birth order states. It's just about getting you home in a timely manner, and that can still be done. Is that right?
Exactly. Yes, I completely agree.
Perfect. Because my mind is always about not limiting yourself unless you have to limit yourself, and looking at, available surrogates and looking at, available states. It's better to be more open if you can. And that's why I also want to talk about California later. But that's great. So what about these cautionary states? We're talking about Arizona, etc. Like, why would we say that something is cautionary, and is there still ways to work there, or should you just stay away from there?
Yeah, so for those states, there is still ways to work there. We just have to make sure that we're following the requirements or, some of the protections that are built into the process carefully. So, for example, in Arizona, lots of good candidates, but they have an old law in the books that says that, agreements may not be enforceable, surrogacy agreements may not be enforceable. But we found over a long period of time now that you can pursue surrogacy safely in Arizona so long as we have a tie to another state where surrogacy is legal and permitted. So, for example, California, Nevada. So it's just about creating that jurisdictional tie to another state in Arizona.
Okay.
Tennessee, not similar, but one of those cautionary states just because they have different rules that apply depending on whether you're using an egg donor or not. So
Mhm.
you just want to look out for that. It's not the easiest process if you are using a gamete donor. So again, um, something to look into. But that doesn't mean that you don't work there. I mean, there are people pursuing surrogacy arrangements there every year. It's just
Okay.
planning ahead of time.
Sure. And when you talk about this tie between, creating a tie of jurisdictions between, to, for example, California, etc., what does that mean? Because we have this kind of conception as well that, working with an IVF clinic in California is a great idea, for example. So can you
Exactly.
talk us about that a little bit?
So yeah, for example, if you are working with a surrogate in Arizona, what you would want is to create a jurisdictional tie to a state with strong surrogacy laws. So in the case of Hatch and PFCLA, with the clinic being in California and the embryo transfer happening in California, you immediately can attach yourself to California law, which means that you can get a California pre-birth order and use it in Arizona if you domesticate it, or you can pursue an Arizona order as well if you'd like. But having that California tie gives the intended parents the protection that they need to pursue an Arizona match.
Wonderful. That's perfect. That's always an interesting concept, even to me after 5 years. I'm like, okay, that's really different.
Hmm.
How about the restricted slash prohibited ones? And please do mention why Michigan is circled in red as well.
So yeah, Louisiana, Nebraska still falling behind in what these laws should be looking like these days. We don't recommend our intended parents work there. Commercial is not the right term, but compensated surrogacy, where a surrogate can receive compensation, is not permitted. Michigan is highlighted here because they recently passed a surrogacy statute that has made surrogacy legal in the state and provides protection for all types of intended parents. So Michigan is now, a new option for people pursuing surrogacy in the US.
Yeah, that's amazing. How many people live in Michigan? Do you know?
I
The
don't know.
spot.
Good question.
Sorry.
I mean, probably quite a bit.
Yeah, I would
I don't
imagine.
know.
Okay, well, that's for our next webinar. How many people
Yeah, we'll do some
live?
geography work.
All right. Well, that's amazing. And I think it shows also, in kind of like a bit of worry about surrogacy, etc. For some intended parents, I think it shows that, their states moving in that direction rather than anything else. And hopefully we have these other states, following suit or updating their very old laws, like you said. But that's great. I think that's a great overview of kind of like what states are available, why they're available. I like that you touched upon all of those kind of things about considerations by state. Marital status is important. Married, same sex, opposite sex. Unmarried, or also single. I guess that also matters for states where you can be single or not. Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And how would you say then when you look at, for example, like a gay couple, what are their options in terms of numbers of states versus a same-sex couple? Sorry,
Well,
sex couple.
yeah, I would say that, what will limit the same-sex couple a bit might be the use of an egg donor,
Mm,
where some of those states that create some additional hurdles for intended parents who are using egg donors that will come into play for same-sex couples. So, for example, Tennessee
mm,
will operate a little bit different for same-sex couples. But I mean, for the most part, same-sex couples have access to um, most of the same states that our heterosexual intended parents have access to now. So that's great. There are a lot of options for them. And like I said, there's about 25 states that are this dark green that are friendly for everyone. And then, total of 42 jurisdictions that we can explore depending on the facts.
yeah, that's amazing. That's awesome. All right. Well, great. Thanks so much for that overview. And I know everybody looking at this, there's so much more to discuss on this. Like this is literally an overview, diving deep inside of which state is the right one. It's not only about legal, it's about geography. Where do you live, or do you have relatives living in other places in the US, etc. And that's convenient for having a match close by. So there's so much to explore more than this, but I hope this gave you a good overview just about this. So I do want to move on and talk a little bit about California. So a lot of the times with our intended parents that meet, me or my colleagues, especially the international intended parents, might have this conception that, California is the option for surrogacy. Like there's nothing else we can do. We got to have this in California. So I would like for you to just kind of touch upon that subject of, why is that kind of preconception? Why does it exist? And is there any truth to that statement?
Mhm.
But also like what other states are equally great places for surrogacy if you compare with just California, and
Mhm.
also what implications it might have for intended parents to restrict themselves to just California or just one state for that matter.
Of course, yeah. So you're right in saying that California is a leader, but it's really not the only safe or optimal state to pursue surrogacy. I mean, some of the reasons that California has become the most popular or requested state, if we want to call it that, are, California has a strong statutory framework. We have solid surrogacy laws that allow pre-birth orders for all types of intended parents, same-sex couples, heterosexual couples, single people, etc. The process over the years has become pretty streamlined. The court's process of the judgment's relatively fast. The hospital vital records process is also pretty streamlined and quick at this point. Our birth certificates list parent. We're not using mother, father
Yeah.
anymore, which, is helpful for a lot of our intended parents. But it does come with some drawbacks, as you mentioned. Surrogates in California are in high demand. They're also more scarce, which means that costs are higher. Normally, California surrogates will receive higher compensation. I mean, would you agree that that's true, Edwin? I
Yeah,
mean, it's been my experience as compared
absolutely.
to other surrogates in other states. And that's mostly because of this issue of scarcity, right? There's not as many surrogates available. The cost of living too, that also plays
Yeah,
into it. So we also have to think about um, the cost of transporting embryos if we need to do that. Uh, Carrier availability, that could delay the process as well. So, it's really not the only option that I think intended parents should explore because there's just so much out there. For example, Oregon is a great state, comparable state to
yeah,
California in terms of allowing pre-birth orders for all intended parents. Colorado, Connecticut, Nevada, Washington, Montana. Pennsylvania is also a good state for intended parents. So I agree with you that, people shouldn't limit themselves because you might be saving some money if you are able to be flexible and go somewhere else.
yeah.
And you might be able to even match a little bit quicker if you're open to surrogates from other states.
Absolutely. And that is definitely true on the agency side of things, that California matches do tend to take longer because of that scarcity and demand. And there are so many great states out there anyways, which we've kind of explored today. But that's great to learn a little bit about that. Let's talk a little bit about birthright citizenship and also leaving the US for our international intended parents. So walk us through a little bit about how that looks, and also, if there's been any changes to that, we can discuss that in the end. But walk us through a little bit about what that means for people pursuing this.
Yeah. So all children born on US soil are US citizens. So babies born through surrogacy are included in this. So babies, your children, future children will be US citizenship, will have US citizenship. The birth certificate will serve as their proof of citizenship, and that allows them to apply for a passport, a US passport. And that is what most of our intended parents use to return home with their babies. Okay. And our team and the Hatch team work together with our intended parents to assist you in obtaining the birth certificate and connecting you with professionals who can help you get a passport quickly if you need it, so you can return home as soon as as soon as you want to or need to. In terms of the changes to this constitutional right, as some of you might know, there was an executive order passed or signed recently that said that children born from parents who are not U.S. citizens or legal permanent residents are not U.S. citizens. So that, of course, threatened this system that we have in place. Luckily, it's been challenged by over 22 states in the courts. The executive order is not currently being enforced, so nothing really has changed. Right now, all babies are still US citizens upon birth. All legal scholars that have given an opinion believe that this is an unconstitutional executive order and that it's probably not going to be allowed to proceed. But we're currently waiting for the Supreme Court to issue some rulings. But for the most part, people seem to be confident that this is an issue that's gonna go away. But of course, we'll work with our clients and keep people updated as we need to. I think worst case scenario, if the executive order went into effect, intended the baby's still your baby, right? The pre-birth order and the citizenship issue are completely separate. They have nothing to do with one another, and the child will still be legally yours. Nobody can take your child, and people will be allowed to return home with their babies. It's just a matter of really what that looks like.
Yeah.
But again, I don't even think it's going to come to that. I think most people are pretty confident that this is an issue that will go away.
Yeah, and the same on the Hatch side. We get these questions about deliveries, international ones, returning back home, etc. And all of that is the same. In our international deliveries last month before that, etc., has all been smooth and going according to process, which is a nice thing.
Yeah,
But of
and
course, we
same
need to keep
here.
back. Yeah. Yeah.
And I do think, it's important to note for our international intended parents, it's always good to connect with an attorney locally to understand what you will need to do when you return home with your baby in order to register your child back home. And of course, the Hatch team, our team will connect you with professionals if you don't know an attorney. And, we'll assist and work with your local attorney as well with whatever that needs to be done in order to complete that process.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. That I know you have those connections and we have those connections. So that's something we absolutely do to make sure everybody's safe and following the right kind of guidelines.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about birth certificates, because this is one of the commonly asked questions or frequently asked questions that I have on my next list and slide. Walk us through that a little bit while we're already here. So we do get questions about who can go on a birth certificate. Does that matter if there's a genetic link or not to the child in terms of, egg donors, etc. So just walk us through that a little bit, like what formats are possible for intended parents when it comes to
Mhm.
getting a birth certificate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so what the birth certificate looks like and who goes on the birth certificate will depend on the state in which we're working. So that's, one of the threshold questions that we address during the matching phase. Um, in a lot of states, for example, like California, we are a and other surrogacy friendly states that I discussed previously, you are able to um, have the birth certificates created in different ways. So, for example, some intended parents need to have the surrogate's name on the birth certificate initially, and then they need to later remove it in order to register the child back home. That's one of the combinations that is possible if necessary in some states.
Hmm.
In other states, if you are a same-sex couple, it's no problem. Both parents will be listed on the birth certificate as the parents of the child. Single intended parents, you can, in a lot of states, you can just include your name, and the surrogate's name does not need to appear on the birth certificate as a mother just because you are a single intended parent. So there are various combinations available depending on your specific facts and depending on the state in which you're working. So there is enough flexibility in the system in order to, achieve the legal goals that we have for our clients.
Wonderful. That's perfect. Let's look at some of the other questions that we usually get. Not usually, but they're frequently asked, and especially depending on where you are in your research. I would say one question that's very much on the beginning stages of your research is usually the first one. As
Mhm.
just walk us through that a little bit of, is it even possible for a surrogate to decide to keep actually a child born through this arrangement?
Yeah, so I would say no. The answer is no, especially in these states, which, as I said, there's a lot of them now that have surrogacy statutes where the law is very clear. The parties are required to have an agreement, a surrogacy contract that is signed before any embryo transfer can take place, and the courts will respect that contract. It's an enforceable agreement. The parties have agreed from the beginning that the intended parents are the parents, and the surrogate cannot take custody of the baby. So the surrogate wouldn't be awarded custody of a child born through surrogacy.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And also important to mention in that context, I feel, is that surrogates really do not have that intention at all. Their intention is, they have their own kids, families. Their intention is now to do this for somebody else, to build a family for somebody else or with somebody else through this arrangement. So it's with an agency that does the proper screenings, that accepts candidates that are right for this process. Could be different factors of, everything from motivation to finances, etc., to really dive deep inside of that and be thorough and looking into all of that, something that surrogates don't really look at or want. So they're very much on board with what this arrangement is, and that's what they've kind of signed up for doing. So that's a little bit of a non-issue, I would say, in many ways, but it's something that we do get questions about for those kind of just starting out, which is totally okay. Everybody starts off differently. I think we covered many of these other ones actually, but maybe we can just focus a little bit on the last one, talking a little bit about these agreements, etc., that you just mentioned, and being enforceable on all of that is great. But what are really the rights of intended parents versus surrogates, legally speaking, in terms of decision making and things like that? I know this is a quite big and deep question, depending on which perspective you take. So maybe you did also answer that with them being enforceable, but just if you can touch upon maybe an example or two of what are the rights of IPs versus surrogate in this
Yeah.
journey.
So I think one thing that intended parents should keep in mind when thinking of that issue is that um, ultimately, in the event that there is severe or long-term health consequences for the surrogate, she does retain the ability to make medical decisions for herself, right? Surrogates are, these angels who are deciding to help intended parents, but at the same time, they have a family to protect, and legally, they do have that right to make this medical decisions for themselves in the event of severe risks to their own health as a result of the pregnancy, right? But that doesn't mean that intended parents don't have any rights. Intended parents can make medical decisions if there's health issues that are affecting the fetus, um, even during the pregnancy. And then post birth as well, intended parents are the only people who can make medical decisions for the child upon birth, right? Because it's your legal uh, baby as declared by a court order that you've obtained. So nobody can take that away from you. And in the case where, a surrogate is facing high complications and there's also potential effects on the fetus, that's a little bit more of a complicated question, of course, that you're always, welcome to speak to your attorneys about.
Yeah, I think that's, like I said, very big and deep question. So I
Yeah.
appreciate the fact that it's not easy to answer here, but I think that's good to kind of give that, explain that divide a little bit between, what's related to her health and safety versus the babies. And of course, sometimes they intersect, and then it's important to have good legal guidance. Wonderful. Well, if you do want to have a legal consultation with Andrew and his team, and our Crystal for that matter, you can go to their website, or you can email, I guess. We could have Crystal's email on here as well, but we prepared for Andrew's. To kind of reach out to Andrew and Crystal to have a meeting. I think you do complimentary initial consultations. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
which is amazing and such a good guidance, and such a nice thing. And we do the same on the agency side, of course. So speaking to us about surrogacy or egg donation, IVF as well, because we have a clinic as well. We can cover those pieces. Also reach out to us. You can go to hatch.us, which is the easiest way, or just email. Or if you're very technically advanced, use that QR code. I never can with my phone. It does, but I'm just technically advanced, not that advanced. So let's see if there's any questions here. I'll keep this up. I think we have at least one question regarding U.S. citizenship, Crystal. In the worst case, do you think it would be better if there is no pre-birth order and the baby is effectively born to a U.S. citizenship?
So that is an interesting question because the way that the executive order is written is a little bit vague. It
Yeah.
uses the term the progenitor, which in surrogacy doesn't really make too much sense because we have a scenario where there's an intended mother or intended father who is the parent, and then there's also the woman who gave birth, who we know is a US citizen. So it's possible that even if we just argue that just because the surrogate gave birth, this child is a US citizen, even if we have finalized the intended parent's parental rights. That might be a possible argument that comes up. We'll have to see what the Supreme Court says in the next month or two before we can make decisions on what the legal strategy looks like. But I do think that may be a viable option if the worst case scenario happens.
Yeah. And then there's also these discussions. I know, I mean, once again, we have to press the point that this is not effective in that sense. But I know there was also discussions about, surrogates actually being U.S. citizens. That's
Mhm.
not guaranteed, right? So like agencies like Hatch, for example, only work with U.S. citizens. But that's also like a point of, that is actually a person that is a U.S. citizen giving birth. So it's an interesting, annoying, interesting kind of part of everything. But just like you mentioned, Crystal, so far, there's no change. And
So
that
far, there's no change.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. That's a good question. So thanks so much for sharing that. I see there's a couple of you still left here. So if there's any last question, please throw it in there. So we'll let Crystal go as well. I'm sure she had a long day ahead of her. I have the luxury of being done with my day after this in Europe, but you're still going full steam ahead. Any last question you want to throw in there? If not, we're going to wrap it up a little bit. In cases where the surrogate puts the health of the baby at risk, for example, consuming alcohol frequently, is there any legal we can do to prevent that for unintended parents?
Can you repeat the question
Yeah,
if
sure. I was reading a little bit for myself, to be honest, first. So it's a little bit about the health of the baby based on the surrogate's behavior. So, for example, consuming alcohol frequently, etc. Is there anything from the legal perspective one can do to prevent that, for example, from the intended parent's perspective? Before I let Crystal answer that, I do want to press the very important issues of surrogate screenings. That surrogates, when properly screened, and this is not something that's very heavily regulated amongst agencies, which is important to work with an agency who is a part of Society of Ethics of Egg Donation and Surrogacy that follows ACRM, which is the American Society of Reproductive Medicine's guidelines, etc. When you have a super screened, well put together process, surrogates have only one thing in mind, and that is the health and welfare of the baby. Surrogates are not out there living a lifestyle of, partying, drinking, etc. That's why it's so important to find an agency that can do the proper screening. We talk about independent journeys, etc., which can be amazing when they work out well, but they can also be very risky in terms of on what parameters is this surrogate chosen to become a surrogate with an agency, not only for your safety, but also for her safety as well. So with an agency, I would claim, like Hatch, like this is something that we always have to be prepared for. Of course, you don't neglect potential issues, but something that surrogates don't really spend time on or dabble in because they want the best for your child. That's why they go through the tough medications, all those medical appointments, all that time away from their family. Like they're really focused on having a happy, healthy birth. But in the unlikely scenario that this does happen, Crystal, what are the legal kind of ways to go about this if that is manageable to answer within a minute or two?
Yeah, so this difficult issue. It's something that's definitely addressed in the certain on all surrogacy agreements. So that means that it's something that you've addressed with your surrogate before you even do an embryo transfer. Most contracts also give intended parents the right to request, testing at random times. Should not be abused, but the option's there if there are reasons to use it. If this happens, I mean, that would essentially be a material breach by the surrogate, and intended parents would have access to all the remedies that are available to them under the law. So for those types of things, you might need to wait to see what the actual effect is. If there is a health issue that the baby or fetus has, and whether that health issue can be tied to the surrogate's behavior, then, those are all very specific, fact-intensive legal questions that you need to look at before you can have a full picture of what the legal remedy is. But of course, surrogates are represented by attorneys. And I know that if my client called me with this issue, the first thing I would do would be speak to the surrogate's attorney. And I do think, they play an important role in helping resolve these types of issues.
Absolutely. And goes both ways, right? Intended parents can breach agreements, so can surrogates. Once again, looking at a good process involves people that are here for the right reasons to do this as partners and have their best interest at hand, both their own and each other's. And those issues usually do not come to the surface or not, they don't occur. But it's good to be prepared, I guess, for worst
Yeah.
case.
And I will say in the 30 plus years that we've been working, we've actually not had that issue.
Yeah.
So, knock on wood, the screening works.
Exactly. And then that's the point. Sometimes we say that it sounds so vague or kind of evasive. We've never had that happen in 30 plus years. And it doesn't mean that it can't. It means that when you do the screenings properly, when you choose with care, you don't sacrifice timeline or cost for having a great, safe process, then, you can have that process. I'm going to let you go, Crystal. I'm sure you have much on your agenda today. We went a little bit over. I hope that was okay. But thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure that everybody agrees that's watching that you've been a great resource to have. And I'm sure you're open to speaking more to our intended parents in the future. And everybody that's watching, thank you for joining wherever you are. I hope this was useful and stay in touch with us. So thanks again, Crystal, for being here today.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.